Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2001 comedy Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Now, this is actually the first film that I saw in the View Askew universe. And I guess it's the first film that I saw bits and pieces of. I think I saw half of the movie. I didn't see the entire film because I only caught it, I think, like halfway through on Comedy Central when I was a kid. And I remember the cock knocker scene vividly. Like, that's one of the first memories I have associated with Jay and Silent Bob is the cock knocker sequence with Mark Hamill and the giant fist and him punching Jason Mewes in the balls, and the whole lightsaber stuff and Jason Mewes puffing from the lightsaber bong. Like, that is my first Jay and Silent Bob memory is the cock knocker sequence. So I definitely do have some nostalgia for this film for that very reason. But even if I, put that aside, I think it's still a really fun, over the top, cartoonish comedy that is really a nice love letter to fans of the View Askew universe. And you could tell that Kevin Smith did intend this to be the send off for these characters and for this universe. He put in everything he possibly could in terms of cameos, in terms of references, in terms of meta moments, and made it this big road trip movie with Jay and Silent Bob as the leads. And I think if this was just the send off, I honestly would be fine with that in retrospect. Even though I do like Clerks 2, and there are things about that I really do enjoy. If this was just the last film in this universe and there was no Clerks 2, I could be okay with that because of the fact that Clerks 3 wouldn't exist. So that's one of the reasons. And the other reason is that this would just been a good place for Kevin Smith to just kind of let this universe go and run its course on its own and not overdo it and not overplay it and not start to retread the same territory like he's done with all of the other View Askew universe movies over the past few years or so. And that would have meant that this was a bigger hit. And then that would have led to Kevin Smith, in my opinion, feeling more confident about the next direction that he was going to take his career in. And then if some of these other films that he did after this were more successful, then we would never have the Kevin Smith that we have today, who smoked pretty much all of his potential and skills away due to just years of waking and baking with weed. That would have happened because he never really would have felt like he would ever have to be in that position. And so you wouldn't have stuff like Clerks 3 where it feels like he's just taking a massive dump on this universe and flipping the middle finger to fans. You would never get that because he would feel satisfied and be happy with where he left things off and where his career is. But that just isn't how things worked out, sadly. But this is definitely one of his last good comedies. He directed the film as well as wrote it. This is also produced by Scott Mosier. I think that's another element that I think a lot of his films lately are missing is Scott Mosier's involvement. Scott Mosier is a guy who was involved with Kevin all the way back when they were in film school, and he was a producer for a lot of their films throughout what is considered to be Kevin Smith's prime. And the decline when it comes to the quality of Kevin Smith's films, it coincides with Scott Mosier leaving to do his own stuff and no longer deciding to collaborate as much with Kevin Smith. So I think that's definitely something that hurt Kevin, that he no longer had his pal, his longtime friend and companion who was there, who wasn't always a yes man, who would probably, take Kevin aside and be like, "Hey man, this is kind of stupid. Let's go. Let's do something else." And Kevin would trust him, and Kevin would actually listen to Scott. Or some of these other producers that he worked with, well, they were just yes men. They were just puppets. Scott was never a puppet for Kevin. Now, from a directing standpoint, the film looks good. It's got some nice selection of shots in it, some good energy, good vibes, some good verve to it. Um, it definitely does match the cartoonish feel that Kevin's trying to go for. Um, this film, in a lot of ways, you could animate it, and it could feel like just an extended episode of the Clerks animated show, and that's a positive because that's a fun series. But this time around, there's no censors. You know, it can be R-rated, it can be crass, it can be vulgar, it can be things that it was not able to be in the animated series because the animated series was on a major network. Um, but yeah, there are a lot of things visually though where it's not gonna astonish you. This isn't a film that's going to astonish you with its visuals or the direction. It's got a nice, pleasing look to it. It looks slick. It definitely does feel like Kevin Smith made the most out of the biggest budget that he's ever had to work with for this movie, while still maintaining his authentic look and feel that was all his own. It didn't seem like, oh, he's doing a bigger budgeted movie with over 20 million and now it's going to look like some kind of artsy fartsy art house movie. That's not what happened at all. Like it still looked like a View Askew film, but it just had more of a budget behind it. And so Kevin could work with a lot of different locations, and he could have a lot of different settings and go over the top with certain things, and have the money to do a lot of these other parodies that he decided to do throughout the film. The screenplay by Kevin, I'm not going to say it's one of his best works, but it's a definitely effective one. It's an effective work by Kevin Smith. I think it's a lot more effective if you're already a fan of the View Askew universe and you've watched all of these other movies that led up to this film, because there's a lot of characters and a lot of references and a lot of other stuff that you're not necessarily going to get and you're going to be left in the dark about if you aren't aware of Chasing Amy or Dogma or some of these other movies. Not necessarily Dogma, but like if you just if you hadn't seen Clerks or Mallrats or Chasing Amy prior to this, you'd be kind of a little lost and wondering what's going on. Like, why are there two different Jason Lee characters or Ben Affleck's? You know, that kind of stuff. Um, and even if you're not aware of that, I think it's still a film that you can find some enjoyment out of because of just its pure zaniness, the stoner humor, stuff like the cock knocker sequence. Um, there are still things that you can connect with that aren't necessarily tied solely into the View Askew universe, which is why I feel that this film has gotten such a big cult following from people who this was their first introduction to this universe, because of the fact that, yeah, it has a lot of these references for fans and callbacks and so on, but there are a lot of other elements in the script that are also accessible to people who aren't necessarily as aware of those things. So they can still be into the movie because of Jay and Silent Bob and Jay himself and his energy and his quotable lines of dialogue and their whole journey, which is to go to Hollywood to try to stop a movie based on a comic that they are the inspiration for, called Blunt Man and Chronic, from being made. Because if it gets made and it sucks, then people are going to associate Jay and Silent Bob with a shitty movie. And so they don't want to be considered losers, and so they decide to go try to stop the movie from being made. And there's a lot of meta stuff when it comes to Hollywood and Hollywood productions. Uh, the casting choices for Blunt Men and Chronic are pretty funny. Jason Biggs and James Vanderbeek. And even like the little brief look at the filming of Good Will Hunting 2 hunting season. There's just a lot of little, not necessarily little, but a lot of fun meta moments of just Hollywood hilarity that I think anyone who is just remotely familiar with the Hollywood filmmaking process and the casting and the hype and all of that, I think it's definitely something that they can appreciate. And there's other pop culture references in this too. Like there's a Scooby Doo parody, which is arguably funnier and better than anything in that Velma show on HBO Max. You want an R-rated Scooby Doo? You want a mature Scooby Doo? Just watch the scene from Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. I'm not gonna take orders from an asshole in Ascot. Uh, but yeah, just a fun movie. There's a lot of just fun moments in this. There are some things where I think it kind of gets a little grating though with the script. I got to be honest. The fart jokes, the first time it was not really that good, and then they kept doing it, and then it was like, okay, all right, stop with the fart jokes. I've never really been a fart joke guy, and there are honestly too many fart jokes in this film for my tastes. And there's some other sophomoric stuff that just really was more lame than it was funny. But there are other things though that I think are that are really clever. The cock knocker sequence, I love that scene. Um, and even some of the stuff leading up to that. I just love the sequence when Jay and Silent Bob they go to movies and they check the internet and they look at the comments on this website called moviepoopshoot.com, and all these guys are like all these random people are like shitting on the movie before it's even come out and uh shitting on Jay and Silent Bob, and Jay gets triggered by it, and he just types this long angry message, and he's like, "All you motherfuckers are gonna pay. You are the ones who are the ball lickers. We're gonna fuck your mothers while you watch and cry like whiny little bitches. Once we get to Hollywood and find those Miramax fucks who is making the movie, we're gonna make them eat our shit, then shit out our shit, then eat their shit that's made up of our shit that we made them eat. Then all of you motherfuckers are next. Love, Jay and Silent Bob." And even the stuff prior to that where Jay is talking to Holden and Holden's explaining to Jay and Silent Bob about how this movie's gonna make a lot of money and there's a lot of buzz about it and it's it's gaining a lot of traction and it's trending on the internet, and Jay's like, "What the fuck is the internet?" So there are some things about this movie that are just rather endearing, and I think a lot of it is just due to like Jay and Silent Bob being the leads here, and it has this old school road trip movie feel to it, and but it's like a raunchier take on that. And there's just a lot of absurd, just unpredictable stuff, like the girl group who's a secret group of diamond smugglers. And even the stuff with the ape, which initially, like, I thought the stuff with the orangutan, like Suzanne, I was like, what even is this a reference to? And once I saw another film in the View Askew universe, then I was like, oh, I get it now. Okay, so the monkey is a reference to another film in the series because there was an ending with Suzanne. I believe it was the end of Mallrats, I think. Um, so now I understand why they have this whole sequence with this orangutan. Um, I will say the stuff with Will Ferrell as the what was it, the fucking animal, yeah, the federal wildlife marshal Will and Holly. That wasn't really as effective as some of the other elements of the movie, and there were some moments where that got a little irritating. The stuff with him, I don't even know if it's necessarily the script, but it might just be more Will Ferrell than anything else. Uh, but I even like the love story between Jay and Boo Boo Kitty Fuck. Like I thought that was kind of sweet and charming in its own way. And the whole sequence where they go onto the Hollywood back lot and wind up on the set of different movies and until they finally get to the set of the Jay and Silent Bob spin-off, the Blunt Man and Chronic movie, and they're doing a sequence and they start fighting Mark Hamill as cock knocker, and that stuff is, to me, that sequence is just the stuff of legends. Like, it's hilarious even to this day. And in a lot of ways, this was like a parody of comic book films long before comic book films were even necessarily as popular as they are today. So it was ahead of its time when it comes to the parody of comic book movies with the Blunt Man and Chronic thing and Cock Knocker and so on, which that also acted as a Star Wars parody, by the way, but it was also comic book parody. And it was also ahead of its time in terms of, internet culture and internet comment boards and stuff like that and social media. And the ending of this movie is so cathartic. Once they, get a deal with, I think it's Banksy, and they get their money for their time working on the movie, or being the inspiration for the movie, or the comic that led to the movie. They decided to use that money to fly all over the world and the country of the United States and just kick their haters' asses. And it's so cathartic as somebody who's on the internet, who's been on the internet for years and has dealt with just stupid, hateful, nonsense comments from people. And it's cathartic because it's one of those things where you definitely, if you've been on the internet like I have and you've made videos and you've had like these hate comments, it's something you've definitely thought about doing, but you never do it because it's illegal and you could get in trouble. But like when you watch this movie and you watch that scene, it's cathartic because it's like you can experience that fantasy of finding out where these motherfuckers live and then just beating the shit out of them with no consequences. And it's hilarious. And the fact that it's all these like teenagers or kids who don't know any better just makes it even more absurd and funny. And then you have like the song in the background, "Who wants to kick some ass?" So yeah, it's a fun movie. It really is. It's got a clever script with a good amount of meta humor. Like, the meta humor in this didn't feel like it was too obnoxious, too overdone. Uh, and yeah, overall, I do think, yeah, it's a good, fun script, a nice little uh, uh homage and send off to the characters of the View Askew universe. Even the little bits where they show Jay and Silent Bob's origin was fun, and even the whole reason why they're going on this road trip, because they're essentially given a restraining order from the Quick Stop because Dante and Randall are tired of them selling drugs outside the convenience store. Um, and even like the ending where, there's a lot of references earlier on with Jay referencing Morris Day and the Time and Jungle Love. And then there's a big party at the end with Morris Day and the Time singing Jungle Love. And it's just a fun party atmosphere and vibe by the end of the movie. The film definitely got as many of the cast members from the View Askew universe as it possibly could have. Now, I know there were initial plans to maybe have some other people involved. I believe Salma Hayek's character was initially supposed to be, I believe, it might have been Jennifer Schwalbach's character, one of these major characters in the film, but then she wasn't able to. No, she was actually supposed to be like somebody who worked at the studio, but then she had scheduling conflicts and wasn't able to do it. So they wound up. So Kevin went into a different direction with a different character, and yeah, I mean, you got Jason Mewes who plays Jay, Kevin Smith, who plays Silent Bob. You got Ben Affleck, who plays himself, as well as Holden and Chucky Sullivan, and Jeff Anderson plays Randall. Brian Christopher O'Halloran, just Brian O'Halloran plays Dante. Shannon Elizabeth, she plays Justice, the love interest for Jay. Eliza Dushku's in it as Sissy. Ali Larter's in it as Chrissy. Jennifer Schwalbach makes her acting debut as Missy, um, because she was dating or was I don't know if she was married to Kevin at the time, but they definitely were a pair. Will Ferrell is in it as Will and Holly. He's over the top and in a way that's honestly pretty annoying most of the time. Jason Lee is there as Brody and as Banky. Matt Damon plays himself. Judd Nelson is in it as a sheriff. George Carlin plays a hitchhiker. Then you have Carrie Fisher plays the nun, who gets surprised cunnilingus by Jay, and then isn't a fan of it. She was actually not the original casting choice to play the nun. It was actually Allison Janney, who I am a big fan of from Drop Dead Gorgeous and I, Tonya, among others. But she had scheduling conflicts with The West Wing, so she couldn't play that role. And speaking of other casting choices, I believe I think it was Charlie Sheen who was initially maybe considered for Will and Holly, but eventually went to Will Ferrell because Charlie Sheen just didn't understand the character, which is too bad because I think Charlie Sheen would have been a nice bit of casting. His deadpan is actually really underrated, and I think he would have played a good straight man to the shenanigans in the movie compared to Will Ferrell just making it an even more over the top movie when it comes to his scenes. Um, Sean William Scott plays the sheep fucker Brent. Jon Stewart has a little role as this guy named Reg. Tracy Morgan is a fun cameo as this drug dealer named Pumpkin Escobar. Chris Rock plays this director who's the director of the Blunt Man and Chronic movie named Chaco Luther King, who's actually a racist and just a total contradictory asshole, but did it in a way that was actually really funny. Um, and speaking of the director, in the original script, the intention was for Quentin Tarantino to play that role, and even Harvey Weinstein was going to have a cameo, but eventually things were cut down, and neither of them made a cameo. And it's a good thing that Harvey Weinstein didn't make a cameo because that definitely would have been a mark on this movie that would not have aged well. Jamie Kennedy plays the production assistant, the poor guy who's working for Chaka, is trying to get him his coffee. He's like, "Did you spit in this?" It's like, "No, no, no spit, no spits, sir, no." Mark Hamill, he plays Cockknocker, and he also does the voice of Scooby Doo in the Scooby Doo parody. Uh, I guess David Duchovny from the X-Files, he expressed a lot of interest in playing Cockknocker, but he couldn't do it because of the fact that he was doing Evolution. So Mark Hamill was then brought on board, and I like David Duchovny, and it maybe would have been fun in the role, but I just don't think it would have been nearly as memorable, especially when it comes to like the Star Wars elements of that sequence, if it wasn't for Mark Hamill. Um, you also have like Diedrich Bader, who's a small role, is the Merrimack security guard, and of course a bunch of people playing themselves. Um, yeah, Wes Craven, uh, Jason Biggs, James Vanderbeek, Shannon Doherty, Morris Day, Gus Van Sant, who is the director of the Good Will Hunting sequel. And yeah, Wes Craven. That was a lot of fun to see Wes Craven because they did another Scream parody within this movie, which is funny because Jay and Silent Bob had a cameo in Scream 3. Um, and you even have Alanis Morissette is back as God when she closes the book on the View Askew universe by the end of the movie. So yeah, really fun cast with a lot of different people, a lot of different talented cast members. Uh, could have been better if Will Ferrell was recast as somebody else. But when it comes to like the main cast, you really can't get better than that because it has a lot of just the same, folks, the same people who made the View Askew universe work. And it does have some other nice little technical merits. The cinematography, it's once again not gonna wow you, but it works. It's effective. It's definitely something that fits with the film and what Kevin Smith was trying to do in terms of the overall look and feel of the movie. The editing by Scott Mosier and Kevin Smith, I think, is really good, really excellent because it just fits the cartoonish, just zany nature of the movie very well and doesn't become too obnoxious. The score is by James L. Venable, and it also fits the cartoonish nature of the movie because that's what Kevin Smith was going for. It's a big cartoon, and James L. Venable brought more of that cartoonish energy to the film with this score. But I guess originally Kevin wanted Howard Shore, who did the score for Dogma, but Howard Shore couldn't do it because he was doing Lord of the Rings. So then he went in a different direction and got James L. Venable, which it would have been interesting to see Howard Shore's idea of Jay and Silent Bob, the movie. Um, the film, it's like 104 minutes and goes by at a really quick pace. It's not one of those things where it feels like it's too slow or too long or too fast to the point where, it doesn't really have good pacing and just feels like it's over in a minute. Uh, it's got a nice balance in terms of the pacing of the movie, the pacing of the jokes, the pacing of the character developments, or the way that the plot is moving along. And the movie made a profit, but it wasn't a huge financial success, which was disappointing for Kevin Smith and a lot of other people involved with the movie. I think they maybe expected it to do better, which I'm kind of surprised by because yeah, these View Askew universe movies were profitable for this any studio that released them, but they weren't like huge, enormous, massive hits. They appealed to a very dedicated niche audience at the time, but it was still very much a niche audience, and I don't understand why Dimension or anyone expected some just massive, huge box office smash. Because a lot of these films and these characters in particular are characters that they appeal to a very dedicated group of people, and they did their best to make the film successful, but they don't really have as much mainstream appeal, at least not at the time, compared to other films. So it's just one of those things where it's more of a cult thing, like a cult hit, and um, it's one of those deals where it's like just kind of unrealistic to expect like $100 million box office for a Jade and Silent Bob movie. But would have been nice. Definitely feel that it would have been nice to have seen it do better. And despite all that, it's definitely gotten a pretty considerable cult following over the years. I mean, there's a lot of people who enjoy this film to this day. Um, and I think that's a good quote here. A raucous comedy that everyone can enjoy, or the quote here, a hilarious, a blast of comic irreverence by the Rolling Stone. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say about Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, except if you're a fan of over the top cartoonish stoner comedies like the Cheech and Chong films, mixed in with a little bit of the absurd, over the top fantasy elements of the Bill and Ted movies, then I think this is definitely going to be something that's up your alley, even if you aren't necessarily as well versed in the View Askew universe. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. And until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.